Good morning and welcome to this masterclass on understanding learning difficulties in the classroom. It gives me great pleasure to introduce you to Champa, today's mentor and speaker. In her 31-year career, Champa has taught at various schools across the country. She has set up teacher resource centers, conducted workshops for teachers and students on communicative language teaching, counseled teachers in non-rote communicative teaching methodology, and conducted workshops on adolescence education as well. Many of you may know about Bukuru. So Bukuru is a festival which is committed to spreading the joy of reading amongst children. Bukuru is, this is a little boasting time. Bukuru is India's first and largest children's literature festival. It is in its 11th year now and has successfully concluded 33 editions in 12 cities across the country and one overseas.
A very good morning to everyone here. I am Champa, as Swati said. I have been in the school field from 1987, started off in Delhi, St. Thomas. And my journey with children with difficulties was, it wasn't a planned beginning. I was a new teacher in St. Thomas, and 1987 was a year where a project called PIED, it was a pilot project with the Human Resource Ministry, UNICEF and NCERT to test out mainstreaming, as it was called then. And I was one of the teachers in the project. And one fine day I walk into school as a fresh graduate from CIE and I see children in my classroom who were not there earlier, children with very, very visible differences. And we were told to manage the children. And that's when I started interacting with professionals, doctors, psychiatrists, neurologists, to find out more and more about what could impact learning. And I was told time and again that if you are a teacher, the first thing you need to understand is how does the brain learn? Do you know that? And I said, no, I really don't. And a personal story here. 1988, I get married. I have a son later, and then I have a second son who has a traumatic birth, and as a result of whatever happened, he turns out to be an individual with a lot of difficulties. So I have a 24-and-a-half-year-old son now, my younger child, who is an individual with clinical mental retardation mild, who is a sportsman who recently represented India in Special Olympics Abu Dhabi and came back with a silver medal in golf. A sport that is so technical that the world said, oh, he can't do it. And I, the special educator, said he can try. And he tried. So what we will try and discover today is the child's perspective. You know, we are, at least this bunch here, we need to be advocates for these children. We cannot be parroting what the world says. They should do this, they must learn this. To live, they have to be able to do this. We can listen to that, but we need to tackle all of this on behalf of these children. And then you realize it's a different ballgame. I will be distributing a set of printouts. Once you have them, read them. And read them as if you were children in a classroom and you were reading a text and you're going to be tested on it, you're going to be asked questions, whatever. Is there something that's not quite okay with the sheet that you have?
There are certain words which are joined together. So two words are joined together and
words are joined together. Anybody else with that same issue? Words don't have spaces between them that they should have. So there is a spacing issue. Is that what you're saying?
I think it's extremely technical.
Oh my God. The passage is extremely technical. You mean the content that you're reading is kind of somewhere there? Okay, so some kind of punctuation issue? Okay.
The letters are incorrectly spelled and they are literally inverted.
Oh, alphabets that seem to look alike, used incorrectly, whatever, like P and B and D and whatever, things like that. Very long. They run into each other. Words are running into each other. No punctuation. Punctuation is an issue. Long sentences. There are no illustrations, there's lots of details, there's lots of information packed into that one sheet. Difficult terms, the language of the content is, you feel as a teacher that could be problematic for a child. This is as close as one can get in simulating the experience of a dyslexic brain. Because a dyslexic brain is not a diseased brain. It is not a medical condition. It is the way some brains are wired. They are made like that. And because they are made like that, when we offer print to them, these are some of the fundamental ways that brain may be seeing the print. This has got nothing to do with the physiological functioning of the child's eyes. The optical nerves are doing exactly what they are meant to do. They're taking the image back to the brain for the brain to make sense of that image. That is the sense the brain is making. So some of these are the way the child with the learning problem sees, actually physically sees the sheet of print or the page of print that is given to the child. Interestingly, as brought out by one of you, that some of the problems remain. There's an information overload. A child in a classroom has to receive input that is technical, that is subject related, and that is not connected to each other. Again and again, over a very short period of time, this brain has to grapple with loads and loads of information input that's coming in, and the short-term memory bucket is just getting full and getting, downloaded, again uploaded, downloaded. It doesn't know what to remember and what not to remember. We realize that there are a lot of teacher-oriented activities that happen in a classroom that, if tweaked slightly, would actually cater to the learning needs of this huge bunch of children who are somewhere in the middle. They are not children who are neurologically impacted with a brain that's differently wired, but they may be children who take a little longer to come to terms with the everyday academic challenges that they are faced with in a classroom. And as they grow from being tiny, smaller amounts, more structured amounts, to higher classes, where more and more of application, more and more of bulk information comes, it's like a floodgate that opens. By the time the child comes to the middle school, you have a child with learning disability. Because now the performance just goes. Why again? Because as we deliver in a classroom, teachers spend a lot of time in introducing concepts, bringing in things. And when I say introduction of a concept, I'm not talking of new things that the teacher is teaching. For a learner's brain, from a neurological point of view, anything that is an addition or that has not been touched upon for a long time is a new sensorial input. The brain cells, the neurons, do not differentiate between what has already been done and what is being done today. If what has already been done is out of the short-term memory bucket, the neurons in those learners' brains will treat them as new input. So teachers do. So they're constantly giving new input, and then they're evaluating. It's common practice to say, okay, so we read this, so what did the fox do? And where did they go? What was the name of the child? We feel that this is a way of getting the child to remember better. But no, this is evaluation. This is testing. We have completely forgotten to consolidate the information that we have given to the children. Consolidation as a teaching pedagogical practice is the most neglected by teachers in the context of Indian schools, primarily because we are dealing with huge numbers here. When consolidation doesn't happen, learning does not happen. As a neurological process, neural pathways in the brain are built just on the basis of consolidation. We are qualified people out here. We've got our undergraduate, postgraduate degrees. But this, it's just English actually. But we don't even want to tackle it. We've already made up our minds. What's this research paper? I'm not interested. It's nothing to do with me. That's what happens when your children are given the alphabet to write, the numbers to master. It's got nothing to do with them. It's got nothing to do with their lives. So where is the motivation? And then you may be dealing with a child who actually has a neurological difficulty with managing print. So as teachers, we have to see that sheet of print from their perspective. But the challenge is we can't ask them, are you seeing the words together with each other? Because they have no idea. Their visual perception, the way the brain has processed the spacing, is normal for that brain. So this is where a huge communication gap emerges between facilitator and learner. We facilitate from our perspective. Sit properly. Sit properly. You're talking back. Sorry. When we talk to children, if we want children to comprehend what we want them to do, we have to use vocabulary that is specific. If I had told her, could you please sit with your feet on the ground instead of 1 feet up, she probably would have understood me as to what I want from her. But the definition of properly for me and for her can be completely different. So when we are trying to deal with issues like inverse writing, or we need to give references to the children. There are margins, there are grids, there's color context. You can be creative and come up with anything. What the child needs is a reference. What the child needs is for you to sit with the child, not opposite the child. You're already dealing with children who may have difficulty, huge difficulty, fathoming left, right, center. Which brings me to a very significant aspect of reports, clinical reports, evaluation reports. Evaluation reports are never complete descriptions of a child's difficulties. If a child is referred to a psychologist for educational psychological evaluation, the child gets evaluated for learning disability symptoms. Now, this child actually may have pretty serious sensory integration difficulties, which are not getting evaluated. Sensory integration difficulties, brains that are unable to integrate the messages from the 5 senses. How hot is it? How cold is it? Tactile, visual, big, small. And connected to this could be spatial discrimination difficulties. Is this enough for me to comfortably pass through or not is a complex decision. Many areas of the brain are working for me to take action on. And if there is a slight break in the circuit anywhere there, I will not know it, and I will try to be a bull in a china shop. So when we want children to adhere to a certain vocabulary, certain words, content specific, we have to tell them that. This is a scientific definition of the atom. I know all of you have now understood what an atom is. Fine, let's do 2 things. Write it out. Speak it out. Tell me what you think an atom is. Yeah, right. That's great. And this is what's been given to us. So that the entire world has the same thing to say about the atom. That's why it's called a definition. Now let's sit and see how it's different from what you said it was. Children need to be told how to learn what we expect them to know. We cannot make blanket statements when it comes to children, especially teachers. Mothers and fathers will do it. You know Gardner and his theory of multiple intelligence? So he said, each one of us has more of an affinity towards a certain kind of thing. He called it intelligences. And some of us are more musically inclined, some of us are more sports inclined, and rhythm and mathematical numbers, blah, 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 all of that. So that's how it is. Your bunch of kids in front of you are all differently inclined. So when you are conveying, when you are imparting your content, it would do well for you to have some of these things in mind. If you've identified children who seem to be displaying reading difficulties, could be put it in pointers. Buddy system works well with younger children. Yes, read, point. As reading is happening, as you've given a reading assignment or a writing assignment which entails reading, go around, stand near the kid, use your fingers. Look at that word. What do you think that is? Yes, good, very nice. You know whether the child has foregrounded, has found that word or not. So it's facilitation, multiple facilitation in a classroom that may have a mix and match of children.
Considering the time clock all teachers work with, that you have a 25 minutes period and then you have to rush to the next class, how actually it is possible?
Yeah, what I'm saying is you tweak your imparting methodology in the classroom. Instead of saying, okay, everybody take out your books, page 39, read first paragraph. You can start with this chapter that we're going to do later, has these things in it. So there are these two really important things. There are 2 crows in it, and there's 1 tiger. Open your books, find. Now you said chapter 39 or page 46. You don't know, even if you don't know, that there are children. Quick round 46, okay, it's here, there. Can you help your friend to find 46? You don't say open the book to page 46 and start reading. Okay, will you start reading paragraph 1? You have children here who haven't found page 46. It's okay even for an 18-year-old in your grade 12 not to be able to find page 46 when you want him to find it. You have to say yes to everything that happens in a classroom. The moment a teacher says, my God, you don't even know this, I say yes, that is why he is still a student. A teacher cannot ever say, you don't even know this. There is no age to knowing anything. So you have to eradicate some of that kind of vocabulary, expectation from your children. What you first need to do is to build this relationship with your child that allows for errors. You should be that one person in the world to whom your child making errors does not really matter. The day you're able to crack that, trust me, your child is going to start trying. These are children with huge socio-emotional blocks because they're always at the receiving end of critical judgments about their abilities and lack of abilities. And unfortunately, school systems around the world actually in some way or the other are highly competitive. The award systems in schools, everything is for performance. Where is the award for trying and failing? If we bring up our children at home, on the streets, in schools, in parks, where we give this due recognition to effort, it's going to be a different children's world. Teachers will not be grappling so much with motivation difficulties because children will then be doing it just for the heck of doing things. Teaching how to write the 9 correctly is not our objective. I need my child to see how 9 is, how the world sees 9. I don't know how my child sees 9. The best input I have is from the way he replicates it when he writes. But then there could be other issues. There could be muscular issues. We don't know. There could be spatial orientation issues. I have to crack my brain and find out, how do I make my child see 9 the way it is? So set the brain to think. A dyslexic brain is not an unthinking brain. We presume. Even a brain of mild to moderate mental retardation is not a brain that cannot think. We need to make them think. What we don't understand is how supremely exhausting it is to live life for an individual who has something like ADHD. Your mind shifting in a matter of seconds. Your hands and legs not yours. They go anywhere. They do anything. And you have tasks to perform. The world is demanding. Sit here, do this, write this out, finish this. Come here, stand in a line. National anthem's going on, stand straight. Are you fidgeting? Imagine a brain like that, which is not in your control. And the whole world is telling you, you're a horrible kid. Stand still for 2 minutes. Okay, it's not that I don't want to stand still for 2 minutes, but I've been told to do other things from inside me. This is a brain. What we need to really remember about the ADHD brain is that attention deficiency causes the brain to be impulsive, not take time to think and act. So when as teachers we sit down with children who are ADHD, and we have in the IEP that we need to increase their sitting tolerance, what we are doing is superficial catering to the need of that child. What you will probably achieve is a habit of sitting in front of you. It's conditioning. Pavlov told us about it long back. We have forgotten him. It's not going to last a lifetime. And it's not going to help your child to use similar tolerances with activities or with situations of life which are new, where you are not there. So you might trigger, after days of working with this child, tolerance, which is symptomatic. It is being triggered by your presence and the cues that you are offering the child. It's not a general learning. Is that what you're for? No. You are a life facilitator. You have to understand that this kid, it's not going to really help the kid to sit in that class for 40 minutes at a stretch. You might as well let him get up after every 5 or 10 minutes, take a quick round, do a brushing, do a stretch, do the, in and out game or whatever it takes to get his frame to shake up. But you teach him or her that we need to have a span of time when we are thinking of one thought, when we are doing one thing. So what you really need to work on with your children with ADHD is mastering the art of single tasking. You play games of mapping the thoughts. That's the toughest. Every 2 seconds, every 3 seconds, you time clock it, you use sandbars, you do anything interesting. You know your children. You know what they respond to, what kind of games they respond to. And you do a 2-minute of thought mapping. You will be rewarded by about 348 thoughts that have crossed the child's mind in 2 minutes. So when we have children who we know have certain set ways in which their brain works, as in the ADHD child, whose brain is set in the way of doing many things at the same time, for this child to be able to understand firstly that we need to do one thing at a time, then to practice it, and then to kind of master that is going to take time. It's challenging. It's very tough. What you're asking this brain to do is to go completely against the way it really is. So, sitting down with your ADHD child, whether the child is 3 or 30, it doesn't matter. It always is fair to tell the child what this is all about. You know, I see from the way you're in the class that you do a lot of things at the same time. Let him not live life thinking he is a freak. They learn the terms. I have tiny children coming to me and saying, "Ma'am, I'm ADHD, can you help me?" "Ma'am, I'm ADHD. "Oh, really? That's a nice dance step." "No, ma'am, I'm not dancing." "Dance, man, I love dance, come on, let's dance together." "But ma'am, no, ma'am, I know I'm supposed to stand straight." I was not being sarcastic, but that is what she is used to. Let's take the discomfort out of their lives, first and foremost. As teachers, as facilitators for children, let's be on their side. Fight the world with them, for them. Don't be with the world against them. "Ma'am, my child needs to do these 3 chapters and all that." I am the teacher. I will tell you what your child needs. Come back after 2 weeks. Your child needs to know nothing from these chapters, is what you need to tell mothers. His entire life does not depend on these 10 chapters, but I'll tell you what your child needs. Your child needs to be helped with his impulsivity. Your child needs to be told that he's a fabulous kid, and told in a way that you believe, because I believe he's a fabulous kid. Your child needs to grow up knowing that ADHD is not a disease. It's like saying you have brown hair and you have black eyes and you have ADHD. It's just that. You don't even need to say it. That is your job, teachers. Any questions?
How can you use reading, or if reading can be used as a tool for any tips for that? Because it's got to do with the attention. So if you're not...
It depends on what is your objective for that reading exercise. Do you want your child to just be able to pick up the words, sit down and read 5 words at a stretch, or you want them to understand what he's reading, or you want him to make a drawing out of what he's reading, etc., depending on that. The golden rule with ADHD is to have much lesser time spans for your work schedules. Things that you really, really want to happen have to happen in 3 minutes. So you have a preparation time which involves the body, because it's extremely difficult for them to be like this. So if you have a reading, you can act out what's happening on this page and this is that. And the next page, the first 3 words, okay, now we've done this. Now sit down and read 3 lines. I'm going to close my eyes. Are you done? That kind of thing. If it's a tiny child. If it's an older child, you can put it on the table and say, like, we are working on your, your way of working. As in, like, you move around a lot and you feel like doing things together at the same time. So we're going to try and change some of your work habits. So I'm going to put this sand thing in front of you. While this tilts, force yourself. Come on, sit there. Can you do it? And just let go when you can't. It's like, you know how when they teach scuba diving, you have to, diving, and you have to hold on to your breath. And so you bring the child on board with you, if it's a child who's 6 and above. Because that's when they like to be involved. It's a right. It's a child's right. It's a human right to know what's going on with them. Advocacy. Teach your children to advocate for themselves. Teach your children to talk about who they are and what they are proudly. It belongs to them. That is who they are. Partly. It's okay. Teach your children that you have to help the world to understand the world is a moron, a huge big idiot out there. They don't know who you are. I know. I'm the special educator. I'm lucky. So we are on the secret. We'll tell the world who you are. What is this special? Nothing special about it. It's tough. It's a challenge. It's horrible. It's horrible to be a person with special needs. And irrespective of what they do and how much they do, hats off to you. If you help your child to be okay with who he is, if you help your child to understand who she is, your child is going to come up with ways and means of circumventing the issues that he or she is facing, and that will be the real learning. You have to facilitate that. You have to be there for them. I don't know if any of you recall, it was in national media, 2017, the horrific case of an 11-year-old child in Chennai. Chennai proper city, child who was deaf and mute, hearing impaired and speech impaired. 7 months of continual rape that she faced, gang rape from the security personnel of her apartment complex. Why did it end after 7 months? Because the child's sister, older sister, visited from Delhi, and the child told her sister. For 7 months, she did not tell anybody else. Not the mother, not the teachers in school. Because, it's one thing that Sonia shared, she felt that is how it has to be with her. That is how she deserves to be treated. This little 11-year-old brain decided that rather than face the wrath of the mother, the anger, she might as well just let this happen to her. Because she had such an innate sense of her disability. Children with special needs is a particular class in a school. They are seen as special, which inclusion is not working by calling them special. It will work when we stop calling them special. So as advocates, as people in the profession, we have to now also keep in our conscious, in our frontal minds about the socio-emotional impact of being a person in this world who does not have the use of all mental and physical faculties as the norm is. The challenge of that life itself is mega and brings with it emotions which we don't acknowledge. I have urged school systems not to use the word concession. I've written tons of letters to the boards, and CBSE has replied to me saying that it's for the convenience of understanding, and I have granted it. Yeah. Easier for schools to understand. The board giving concessions to children with difficulties. It's not a concession, it's a right, man. It's a right. So when you are creating your programs, your IEPs, your concessions, you have to keep in mind that apart from the symptomatic issues that you are dealing with as a teacher, there is this huge invisible challenge that your child faces day in and day out. And it's not going to take you much difficult reading to find out the impact of moods on learning ability. The impact of emotions on learning ability. Most of the time when they backchat, when they throw things, when they have a tantrum, they are afraid. It is being triggered by very, very deep fear. What happens when there is fear? A lot of complex things happen. But both fear and stress, they ultimately end up in the release of cortisol. the hormone cortisol. When there is a stimulus, in fact, neurons wake up. Any stimulus to the brain, the neurons start moving around, and as they swim and move around in the brain space, they might come closer to each other. The dendrites, there's a synapse, the dendrites come, and information is passed. It's very complex, but to simplify it. But what is important for a teacher to remember, the synapse has to happen for the information to pass through. And that's how the brain starts making sense. When there is cortisol, the dendrites curl up. Learning cannot happen. Neurologically, learning is a brain process. It cannot happen. And when we work with children with special needs, they have bunches and bunches of dendrites that are completely shrunk all the time. They don't know you, they don't know what you're going to do with them. They know you have huge expectations. They know they're far more real about their disability than their parents are. You have to tell your kid, sweetheart, you are kind of scared and maybe uneasy. You've class chhodke, you have to come to me, and I can understand this. You're building a bridge. Let's see. Okay, do you feel you have some issues in the classroom? Some will say yes, some will say no. The first battle is for your child to tell you that he has issues. That's when he'll start breathing. The day he tells you, I can't do spellings. Okay, so, and you move on to something else. This brain is going to think, she never reacted. She didn't look at me like I was a freak. A pathway might open up where your child will start telling you about the emotions. That is your breakthrough. Even if it takes away 15 minutes from your precious 40-minute session where you were supposed to do 5 sums and you've ended up doing half, it's okay. Have you ever asked your special needs children for advice? Genuinely, do it. You know how good you feel when your colleague comes and says, yeah, please, will you tell me how to do this lesson? Or when anybody asks you to help. These are children who are always being told to seek help. It's so demeaning. It's such an insult to live a life where all the time I need to ask people for help. Teach me how to spell, teach me how to write answers, teach me how to talk, teach me how to stand straight. The fact that he can't spell or read or write or get a 0 or blah, blah, blah is one part of his life. The other part is that you're a teacher and you love this kid and you are asking this kid for help. I've got these papers to total, I've got these numbers to total. Can you use the calculator? Write with pencil, because if you go wrong, it's okay, but it'll really help me. Thoda to kaam aage ho jayega types. Anything, create. But emotions have scientifically been proved to have a huge, huge, huge impact on learning abilities. Where are the emotional levels of my child? What about self-esteem? What about self-worth, esteem, worth, value? Not really synonymous. They are different. Happiness can't be measured. Useless word. Confidence, willingness to try, take a step. A mistake is to be respected and used by your child and you. Look, Champa, I was not very happy with that C. And then the next one, the third one you wrote, I kind of smiled and I was happy. Is there a difference? Why do you think I was not happy with the first C, Champa? The day your children start spotting where they are going wrong on their own, you have won a major battle. Because as many times as you rub out and scratch out and fold out mistakes, they are not getting to compare. Discrimination is a brain ability that is very, very subdued in children with any kind of disability. Any kind of disability. Discrimination means the ability to understand differences in forms, in sounds, in smells, in textures. This is red and this is blue. Parroting. This and this are two different colors. Are they? I'm confused. Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Okay. There's a bunch of sketch pens there. Can you pick out something which is this? Can you pick out something which is this? No names yet. We bring in the nomenclature later, otherwise they're parroting. Concept's not there. Discrimination is something which should be there in all your IEPs. And that is how even children with ADHD might be able to understand that there are some situations where impulses have to be held on to for a short while. If they learn, if you've cracked it, if they can learn the difference between an activity which can potentially lead to harm, we have to look into the eyes of our children to catch the expressions. We have to look at the body language of our children to catch taut and stressed shoulders, fists clenched, holding on, elbows close to the body. A relaxed posture will have elbows all over the place. You have the backbone which is rigid, that is stress. You have eyebrows that are not going up and down, that is stress. Fixated eyes, that is stress. Your child is not learning. Your child's brain is so occupied dealing with the stress. So occupied. The first thing he needs to hear from you, oh my God, look how stressed you are. I'm not such a bad person. Come on, you don't want to do it? No? Okay, forget it. We won't tell ma'am. Secret. 2 minutes. You have him giggling, you have him doing something else, and then, okay, but come on, a little bit. Shall we get back to it? I'm telling you, it's really tough. I know. I mean, learning how to do this D straight is the toughest thing in the world. I really know what you're going through. But come on, let's try. You don't tell your children it's easy. You don't say, kuch nahi hai isme beta, seekh jaoge. You are battering their self-esteem. You're telling them ki itna, there's something so easy and he still can't do it. Arey nahi, you have to say the opposite. My God, sweetheart, I know how tough it is to read correctly. I understand your issue. It's complete, it's really tough. And some of us read well and some of us don't, but these schools don't understand it. It's really tough. But theek, I'm happy that we're getting this time together. Come, let's try. We'll try together. You help me to read, I'll help you to read. Let's see if we can find a way. Their problems are not to be thrown away. They have to be acknowledged. It is a problem. But well, maybe we can try.
Now, my question here is, I'm a little confused with the kind of system we are in, with the kind of education board, and especially with education, with respect to education.
What I meant to say is, don't take things as they are at face value. Everything that goes by under the name of inclusive practices, question, how inclusive is it really? Have we asked, have we tried to find out from the receiving party? Let it not be a blanket taken for granted practice. Let's question the practice. It is by questioning that we might arrive at parallel or other practices that may actually encompass more of the needs, is what I meant.